Subscribe to our YouTube channel for in-depth interviews of India Inc. and press the bell icon so that you do not miss our updates.
Hello and welcome to Nirmal, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Hiral Dadia. We have with us Mr. C.M. Vasudev, former Secretary Expenditure and Economic Affairs, joining in. Welcome to the show, Mr. Vasudev. My first question coming to you right now is COVID-19 has actually put all of us in unprecedented times, and the impact that we've seen on different economies across is huge. What is your take on the same?
Well, the impact of this COVID-19 on the economies, both globally and in India, is certainly unprecedented. And it has totally changed the concept of how the state works in an economy. There is a never before seen type of a radical type of state intervention that is being practiced in different countries all over the world. And overall state spending also has increased by, I think, more than 2% of the global GDP if you take the world as a whole. But more than the number of 2%, I think it is the qualitative changes in the state's intervention which are, I think, more significant. So going forward, even while dealing with the pandemic currently as the entire world is wrestling with, I think even in a post-pandemic situation, the things will be entirely different from what we are used to. And of course, different people have different takes on that, what the post-pandemic economy is going to be, and what type of policymakers' roles will there be, and how the economies will interlink globally and various other factors.
Absolutely. And overall, if you see the paths that different countries have taken, Mr. Vasudev, with regards to number one, tackling the pandemic, tackling the impact on the economies, has been really different. Which is the best, according to you, which could be actually used as a role model? Because, across as well, especially in terms of developed countries, you are seeing a lot of, fund infusion that's happening in the economies, a lot of liquidity that is being pushed in as well. Now, taking the size of India, yes, you can't really compare that it could be exactly that much. But what is the sense that you pick up on that front? Which country would you pick up as a role model on the economic perspective?
Oh, are you talking about the policies different countries are
Absolutely.
following with regard to the economy or with regard to dealing with the pandemic?
No, with regards to the economy.
Oh, yeah, of course, different countries have got their own, but there are certain common factors. But ultimately, a lot of it depends on the affordability of different countries. Affordability of some of the more developed and richer countries is much more. They are able to spend 10% or even more of the GDP on fiscal stimulation. Poorer countries and less developed countries and the middle income countries like India don't have the same luxury to binge so much in terms of fiscal profligacy. So naturally, these countries are a little more cautious and they are trying to find another route of providing liquidity support to the sectors of the economy while providing direct benefit transfer to the poor sections of the population. So those are the differences, but ultimately it is all the countries are trying to provide a fiscal stimulus, and number one. Number two, providing some sort of a comfort, social security comfort to the population by direct transfer to people. Even US and all have done direct transfer per month to people. So it's a combination of the two. Direct transfers to the extent the country can afford. And number two, provide stimulation through monetary policy and liquidity support for boosting the economy.
Right. So with this, the path that India has taken, especially in terms of where the stimulus package goes, everyone has been of the opinion that more than a fiscal stimulus, it's been more of a credit stimulus that has been provided. Now, again, it's not direct liquidity that has come in the hands of everyone, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
do you think something more can be done beyond the stimulus that has already been announced in India?
Well, I'm sure nobody can say that more should not be done. Of course, more should be done. But as far as I can make out, the strategy of the government so far has been a mix of a direct income support to the poor, whether it is
Mm,
cash or through food grains, free supply of food grains and things of that type. Then liquidity support to the MSME sector mainly, so that they can start some manufacturing activity, which itself, apart from preserving some jobs, may create some demand in the economy. And then the government policy also is with regard to protection to domestic manufacturing through this, what they're calling it, Atmanirbhar Bharat and things of that type. And then also wooing some foreign direct investment in key sectors, especially in the context of what is happening with China, both with India and China globally. So trying to foreign direct investment of that type. And of course, government is also using this opportunity to initiate some politically difficult reforms in the economy. So a few that have been introduced include, say, private sector in trains and private sector for merchant mining of coal, the definition of the MSMEs, and then the labor market reforms. So some of these reforms, which in normal situation would be politically very difficult to do, I think government has taken this opportunity to try to initiate some of these reforms, which will not have an immediate impact, but I think it is certainly going to benefit the economy in the medium term. So yes, something more government could do for boosting demand in the economy, but I think it's a very tough task how to balance that, because as I said, we don't have that luxury which richer countries have to provide unlimited fiscal support. Uh, Everything is linked, our current account deficit and inflation and exchange rates and all things are interconnected. And if the government debt goes too high, then of course it's going to create problems. And RBI and central banks, I think the world over, have been very accommodative. There's a lot of cooperation between fiscal and monetary policy. So central banks all over the world and also in India for the same reason, instead of being a lender of last resort to the banks, are becoming lender of last resort to the economy as such. So the government, how much government can depend on RBI for financing its fiscal deficit, for providing a stimulus, that is going to be a very big challenge as we go forward.
right. And with this as well, what's happened is right now, uh, the question is whether the government should curtail expenditure in different and various forms, and if yes, which are the areas where the government should curtail expenditure, and where is it that they should start pumping in money to get growth, to get development, especially if you have to talk from the employment side, from the labor side. So if you have to look at this on a complete basis, because the government has clearly come out and said that yes, we are open to borrowing more, and this will mainly be to boost infrastructure spending. So if they have to do this, which areas do you think that the government could go ahead and curtail their expenditure?
Well, the government sort of non-capital or the revenue type of expenditure, as it is called, I think its composition is very rigid and very difficult to cut anything out of those expenditures which are running the organs of the state, running the judiciary, the security, and the defense forces, and all that. So I remember when I used to work, we had calculated that 80% of this, what used to be called non-planned revenue expenditure, uh, was 80% or more, was so rigid that you cannot touch even an iota out of that. So that leaves you with some type of plan expenditure, which in the current environment, some plan schemes may not be so relevant, may not have that clarity, and you need to divert from some of those to the social sectors, mainly the health sector and the like. Some of those you can do, but I don't think there is much room for providing a fiscal stimulus by curtailing expenditure. The only way you can have a room for fiscal stimulus is by borrowing more or by having RBI to come to the government's rescue in that sense by financing the deficit in one form or the other, which most of the countries the world over are now trying to do. But as I said earlier, the room for that type of a fiscal space in India is extremely limited because of our other problems and the stage of the economy and all that. So it's really how much you want to use the RBI for providing resources to the government by financing the fiscal deficit, which will try to create space. I don't think there is any room for providing fiscal space by cutting expenditure in areas of normal government expenditure. Very limited scope there.
Right. But do you think RBI could go in for a direct monetization of debt? And if this could happen, uh, at what threshold do you think they could take decisions like this?
That's a very tough one. Certainly they could. There's no question RBI can do it, but the issue is whether they should do it and how much they should do. And I think it's only the RBI which has the access to all the information and data and all that is able to determine that point where it feels that you can go this far or not. And apart from that, I think it is also a question of timing and
Mm,
also a question of what do you use that fiscal space for.
mm,
If you're going to use that extra fiscal space by monetizing the deficit, and that is going to be used for consumption type of expenditure, that is going to create more problems in the longer run, and the debt problem will become more intractable. So you also have to see that fiscal space that you create is used for some productive expenditure so that it can create some sort of capacity to
mm,
service the debt that is going to be generated in that. So if the quality of that fiscal stimulus, I think, is extremely important. So the government and the RBI have to, I think, come together and think how much monetization should be done and how that monetized fiscal space is going to be used for some mix of productive and certainly some consumption expenditure is needed for social security and things of that type. But it should not be only that. That's what I'm saying. There should be a balance between the use of the fiscal space for capital and productive expenditure, infrastructure, and things of that type, which will create a demand in the economy, and how much you want to give direct consumption support to people. So that balance has to be struck. It is very difficult for me, without access to the full information, to give any number on that.
right. And with this, Mr. Vasudev, you have the government which is coming out and saying that a lot of economic indicators right now, especially that have come in for the month of June and July, are looking slightly promising versus what they were earlier due to COVID. For example, the GST collections, or if you talk about the railway collections, freight traffic, all of them in the month of June and July have shown some bit of promising growth since India began unlocking the economy. Now, if you have to take these parameters into consideration, and the governments say as well that yes, there is positivity which is returning, do you think it's good to say that yes, probably we could see a V-shaped recovery as well next year in terms of growth?
I think there are certainly, as the numbers are indicating, and some government spokesmen have talked about some green
Mm,
shoots and all that. But I would say that it is a little premature to sort of build something on that. I think we have to see more of that, that there are temporary blips here and there, because there is so much of pent up sort of demand in that sense, pent up consumption demand and all those things. So people, when they've now gone to their homes in rural areas and all, and some pent up demand is coming out. But how stable that is and how indicative it is of a trend, I think it is a little early to come to any conclusion on that. But certainly there are green shoots, and we need to watch them more carefully. The other thing I just want to, I think, mention, I think, which people have talked about, you know, this migrant labor, which is really the backbone of the manufacturing sector, which has now come back to their uh, dwelling places in rural areas, whether it is in UP or
mm,
Bihar or Orissa and all that. Now uh, they have come back to a rural system where they find many more opportunities than what they were there when they left their homes for employment opportunities in metro towns in
mm.
Bombay, Ahmedabad, and all that.
Correct.
So maybe there will be a little shift in that sense, that there will be more activity in rural areas, more economic activities. Business will also start thinking of trying to set up businesses in areas where migrant laborers have gone back. So that is a trend which I think is going to happen. And secondly, this growth centers, which that large metro cities like Bombay and Delhi and Chennai and Calcutta and Ahmedabad and Bangalore, that is going to see a big change. I think we'll see more newer growth centers coming up closer to rural areas. And
Mm.
so this type of conglomerate metropolitan things, I think they are probably things of the past. So these are some of the other trends which one needs to see
Mm.
in a post-pandemic situation.
Right. So, in terms of the reforms that have come out, government policy reforms in recent times, especially in the areas of agriculture, coal mining, and privatization, do you think they're enough to have a positive impact right now?
Well, yes, certainly they are very, I think, basic and far-reaching impact changes, especially private sector in running of trains, or private sector or merchant coal mining
Mm,
in private sector, and the labor reforms and some other things that they have done. But they are going to have an impact not in the immediate short run, but certainly medium term. They're going to give a lot of dividends, I think, to the economy. It should help in boosting the efficiency of the economy in a big way. But today, people are reluctant to invest. There is no appetite to invest more in any case. So some of these areas which are incentives for more investment by the private sector, obviously this is not the right time, but there is a base when things improve and the appetite for investment increases, both the domestic and the foreign private sector, then I think the benefits of these will start yielding some returns.
right. And with regards to privatization as well, Mr. Vasudev, do you think it's one of the most important and major announcements that has been made, probably say after 1956, when we actually decided to have, public sector enterprises as our showpieces? And this is the first time that, any government has come out and said that we will not have companies in the non-strategic sector, in the private sector, and in the strategic sectors also we will have less number of companies. Is it as big a statement or as big a reform to be taken down?
Well, yeah, I think it is a very big statement of policy, but like in many other areas, it remains to be seen how and how much the government walks the talk. And of course, they are very good statements of intention and statements of policy. But in actual practice, how it will work, especially in an era when where we are seeing much more enlarged role of the state in different sectors of the economy, and dependence of the ordinary person on the government for its various activities, how government will be able to shed some of its responsibilities in the public sector. Though it's a very welcome policy announcement, but very difficult to envisage that that will happen in a foreseeable future, I would say.
Right. And now that the government is looking to come out with a list of strategic sectors, they've said it's going to be a maximum of 3 to 4 sectors that they're going to look at. Which sectors, according to you, should be a priority in terms of strategy right now?
For the government's role, for
Yes.
the public sector?
Yes.
Well, I think of course, the priority is going to be, I don't see too much whittling down of the government's hold over the financial sector. The banking sector, which today is at 65, 70% of the business is public sector banks, and there is still no appetite in government, I think, to reduce the government shareholding in public sector banks to below 50%. So that one sector will remain a strategic sector. Then, of course, I think even in the oil energy sector, I don't see too much change happening, though they are trying to privatize the BPCL, and one has to see what really happens on that. Then, of course, health sector is, in that sense, is going to remain. Um, Infrastructure sectors, a lot of them will still be in government despite initiatives, whether it's the railways or even ports and highways. A lot of that will remain in the public sector. Some private sector activity in ports and all you can see, but I don't see too much happening in that area. Other than that, I think the defense, of course, is another one where there is an attempt to bring in private sector, but I think government will still remain the main strategic sort of investor in the defense sector, as well I can see. And other sectors, whether it's steel and textiles and cement and all this private sector, telecom, all this automobile sectors, all private sector, I would say. They are not strategic in any way.
Right. And with this, with regards to banks as well, do you think this is the right time for bank recapitalization?
Well, recapitalization of banks, I think Reserve Bank governor has already asked the government to look at that, and probably there is time, but government, I think that this merger of some of public sector banks has created some better space for some of the weaker banks, instead of depending on government for capitalization, since they're merged with stronger banks. So the capital of the stronger bank is now available for them. So to that extent, the urgency of capitalization of public sector banks has lessened, I think, to some extent because of these mergers. But going forward, if the economy picks up and there is more lending by the banks and this and that, then government will have to step in. But I don't think that in the short run there is a need for bank capitalization in that sense.
Right. So, Mr. Vasudev, right now, if we have to look at a post-COVID India, what should be the revival plan according to you from here on? And what are the reforms that the government should look to consider, uh, taking the next 5 years into consideration with the kind of hit that we've already seen?
I think we've discussed some of these aspects in earlier parts of the discussion. And I think there'll be, in a post-COVID situation, there'll be profound changes in which the government functions, in which the economy will function, in which the role of the policymakers will be in post-COVID, especially economic policy making. There'll be a big change in India and probably elsewhere in the country. And as I mentioned, the 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 economic growth that we've seen hitherto, which is centered around development of metro towns and jobs being created in those areas, people migrating to where jobs are being created and all that, that may undergo some change and new growth centers may come up closer to rural areas and jobs will be created there. So it will be a greater decentralization of the economy from the metro-centric economy. That is going to happen. And many more opportunities, I think, in rural areas will come up. And food processing, I see a big role in those areas that is going to happen. Then, of course, the digital economy is going to become the backbone. I think it's already growing fast and it probably will grow much faster. And also the government, also the economy will probably become a little more inward looking, more protection for the economy, for the domestic manufacturers, less of global integration, and that is going to happen. And of course, the government's role in terms of infrastructure investment, providing social security and people, health sector, all these are going to have much greater prominence as we go forward.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned as well, a lot of data points when we talk to industry leaders as well from the corporate side are indicating that the pent up demand or the up move that they'd seen in terms of sales numbers as well, all of that is actually coming in from rural India versus the urban area. So probably the pickup in terms of growth is going to be faster in rural India as well. A very valid point that you've made. But thank you, Mr. Vasudev. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Great insights that we picked up from you, and we will come back to you for more as and once things unfold from here on. But thank you so much for finding time for us at Nirmal Bank. Thank you.
Just one last point that I feel that
Sure.
lifting people out of poverty is going to become a bigger challenge in the post-pandemic era. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.